Welcome to the Mothers of Misfits podcast. Join me for conversations about how to advocate for our kids in a one-size-fits-all world. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Mothers of Misfits. And we've got a wonderful member of the mom community with us today. Jill Laudati is a mom and a speech language pathologist. Her two sons and husband have ADHD. And what's so cool is that together as a family, they wrote a memoir called Itchy Brain, and we'll get into that in a minute. So cool, good name. To help spread awareness for ADHD, they want to share their journey and experiences with others with the goal of turning a negative stigma into a positive one. Jill, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so let's just get right to that name, Itchy Brain. I love it. And that's the name of your book. It's the name of your site, your shop. Where did that name come from?
It came from my older son, who is now 8th grader, so he's going to be 14, but probably when he was around 11 years old, he has ADHD, and he was just having a moment of dysregulation. He was on his bed, he was crying, he just wasn't having a really good day. So I walk in there and I said, "Bud, what's going on? What's going on?" He's like, "I don't know, no, my brain, it just feels itchy." And I'm like, "Itchy?" So I kind of take a step back and I look at him and I look at my husband and I said, "Wow, that's pretty powerful for an 11-year-old to describe how he's feeling." So I asked him again. He's like, "My brain, it just feels itchy." And so from then on, we just used that to describe when he was having difficulty or dysregulation, and we called it Itchy Brain. And we just thought, what a better way to describe it and help others understand what ADHD is. So we just wrote a story and we wrote our memoir and just tell people about our journey as being parents.
Yeah, he is a really clever kid. I love that name. And it's such a tactile descriptor of
Yep.
what's going on. So tell me, how did your story unfold? So you met your husband, and when you met him, he knew he had ADHD, correct?
He did. He did. He
Okay.
didn't really necessarily get diagnosed right away because he was just, he's just a kid. And
Hmm.
when you're born in the late 70s, you don't typically get diagnosed. His mom was a teacher, and she just knew what she needed to do to help him and support him just from being a teacher. So as he got older and we got married, it was just things he did. That's what attracted me to him. I was like, wow, this crazy wild guy, I just love it. And then from then on, we just, had kids, and I started noticing some tendencies. I call them unique characteristics of the boys. My younger one, and both of them were in my stomach, constantly flipping. And I'm like, ooh, I'm like, these are active boys. Because you just,
Uh-huh.
everyone thinks it's active. They're active. They're active. Of course they're active. But there was something that I noticed that I realized, like, okay, I'm getting a lot of phone calls from schools. I'm getting a lot of emails. Let me see what's going on. So when they turned right before 8 or around 8, before going into 3rd grade, I was like, all right, this is the time when I should get them diagnosed, just to get those accommodations they needed for them to have the success they should get. Because the last thing you want is someone to not like school because the teacher's not supporting them. So that was our biggest thing. I knew what I needed to do being at home to help them, but I just wanted them to have confidence at the schools.
Absolutely. And how did you help them not see that diagnosis as a negative thing? I mean, I'm sure it helped that their dad had
Right.
that, and they, look up to
Mm-hmm.
him and how he has turned that into a positive. But what kinds of conversations did you have with them about this being more superpowers or
Yep.
capabilities or strengths that we just need to harness in the right ways versus the negative labels, the negative stigmas that often come with a diagnosis like this?
Right. So you said it perfectly. It's such a negative stigma. We want to turn it into a positive. I always provided them with the language they needed. Being a speech language pathologist, I'm always like, all right, this is what you need to say. If you need to take a walk, you have to ask, I need a break. If you are having trouble focusing, you ask, can I have a fidget? Can I chew some gum? So we had a lot of accommodations that were added into their 504 plans that we established as a team. But I think the biggest thing was is I showed them how to advocate for themselves. And I told them, listen, it doesn't matter if you're hyperactive. You're living life in the moment. It doesn't matter if you talk so much. You just want to get your point across. You're passionate. So we tried to turn all those characteristics that I wouldn't even say are negatives, but just something that is a trait of ADHD, and we turned it to be just a negative attribute, as I say, and it really helped them to understand. And early on they'd be like, I have ADHD, I need a break, or I have this, I have that. So it was they were very, very cute with how they perceive themselves, and when they had to explain themselves to teachers or coaches or friends when they were having moments. So
And kudos to you. I mean, that's exactly what we want to have happen. And what we talk about so much on this podcast is empowering our kids
yeah.
to ultimately be their own best advocate. And we
Hmm.
stand in for as long as we need to, but we can't be with them 100% of the time.
Correct.
And giving them that self awareness to first know what they need, and then the confidence to express what they need, and then involving the system to honor that. And
Hmm.
speaking of, so you're in the system, right? You're a speech
Yes.
language pathologist, as we said, and you see things from that perspective. Has it helped you to be a teacher in SLP, or maybe hurt you sometimes that you see that side of things too? I'm just curious because you
Yeah.
really have a foot in each camp as the mom and then also as the professional.
And married to a
Oh,
gentleman who
true.
has it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I have
Also
the
very
I
true.
do I do look at stuff differently. I think being a speech language pathologist, and I work in a private special ed school, so I typically have children who have other diagnoses that are maybe coupled with ADHD. I think the biggest thing is when you go to school, you're taught what you're needed to teach because of research or because of what's written in the books, but you're not really taught, okay, if he's having a breakdown or a meltdown, or even, as they say, like a tantrum, something that might work that they said in a book doesn't necessarily work because every child's different. That's why they have these
Mhm.
individual education plans, because you want them to have the success that they need. So I think I always looked at it as, okay, you might have this, diagnosis, but, you know, you having breaks might not work. You might need more structure, and you might need stuff to be written down, or you might need frequent breaks, and you might need a sensory diet to help them with, the deep pressure that they need. So I looked at it that way. And when I graduated, my husband and I ended up getting married after I graduated college, grad school. I had a few years to really understand what it was to be a speech language pathologist, and to get the experience I needed for the, what the students need and the supports, and be like, hey, this is reality. What you learn in textbook has nothing to do with it. It's all about experience. It's all about confidence. It's trial and error, and if you make a mistake, it's not a big deal. You can fix it. You just move forward, and you brainstorm, and you talk to your colleagues, and you just see what will work for the child, because the biggest thing is you want that child, like I said, to have that success. And it doesn't matter what diagnosis they have. You can tell that a child's having success because they want to come to your class, and they have that expression. They might be communicating in a different way. So if a child acts out, it's not necessarily they're having bad behavior. They're just trying to communicate, whether it's functionally or just trying to get their point across. So I think it did help in regards to raising our kids and understanding. The funny thing is, even though my husband has ADHD, he looked at stuff so differently because his ADHD is so different than my two boys. And my two boys also have such different characteristics for their ADHD. So it's funny, you kind of have to look at stuff as a whole, but you also have to remember there's all little branches that branch off, and it doesn't matter. No one goes the same route. It's such, like I said, it's really not a disability. It's just unique characteristics to make you who you are.
Yeah, even amongst us misfits, which really
Yeah.
everybody is a misfit in
Yes.
some way, we're misfits of misfits, and
Yep.
there just is no one size fits all. And even amongst different groupings or
Hmm.
different capabilities or challenges, there's variations in that. And it sounds a lot to me like parenting and teaching are really similar in that
They are.
you can read all the books
Yeah.
and have all the head knowledge and expertise. And it's not really until you live it that it's like,
Correct.
"Oh, whoa, whoa, okay,
Yep.
now I think I get this," but more than anything, it's humbling to say, I don't always got this."
Yeah.
At least that's
You
how
do.
I feel like parenting is. It's
You
a
have to
lot
be
of
flexible. You have to be very flexible.
yeah. Very
Mhm.
flexible and willing to adapt and
Yep.
adjust and
Mhm.
admit that that didn't work. I mean, how many of us, or I'll say
Right.
before I was a parent, right? I was really good at being critical of
Yes.
everybody else's parenting style. And like, I'm never going to do that. I'm surely not going to do that. I am always going to do this. And then again, the experience of it is like, whoa, okay, this is
For
harder than I thought, or
Yep.
that does not work with my kids, or it doesn't work like
Mhm.
it did in the book.
Yep.
So just constantly moving forward with curiosity and humility,
Mhm.
whether we're teachers, whether we're parents, wherever we
Yep.
are in encountering other human beings, that tends to just be a good way forward.
And it's funny, I feel as though I became a better speech language pathologist after I had
Mm,
my boys because
mm,
you look at stuff differently. And being, like you said, you do have to adapt more, but you also have to take into everyone's perspective. So
mm,
as a speech language pathologist, I would look at, my boys' teachers and think, okay, so they might not be as flexible. They might not want to do it this way. So you tell me what you want to do and you explain to me if this is going to work. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to have to come up with a new plan. But we picked our battles. We always tried to take a step
mm.
back. And I used to talk to my husband and we would be like, okay, when should we contact the teacher? When should we contact or call a meeting? And we would read our children too, because if they came home and they weren't upset or something wasn't bothering them, I'm like, okay, let's just leave it and we're not going to make a big deal about it. And then if we notice that situations were bothering them or, other students might look at them or they're like, oh, they kind of were mean or I can't help moving so much, mom, but sometimes they stare at me and I'm like, okay, well, they're probably thinking like, that's cool. How I can't move my body like that. Or I would have never thought to say that. I go, who cares what people think? It doesn't matter because you guys are kids. And as you grow older, I go, people stare at people all the time. I always tell them that. I go, it doesn't really matter. I go, you look, when you go out, you look at people, just think of it as they're looking at you thinking like, wow, they're pretty cool.
I
So
like that. So what do you think of the phrase, boys will be boys, or boys are just, they're just being boys?
I know that it is that's definitely a hard one with you having boys because you
Hmm.
people always think, oh, boys will be boys, boys will be boys. And so when I was pregnant, that's what I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna have a really active boy. But we had to really break it down to see when we started noticing some discrepancies in academics or in that their little education and just looking at their overall mental health when they would come home and they're like, mom, I'm crying so much. I might be hyper and I'm going around, but I can't control my emotions and I don't want someone making fun of me or, I'm moving too much and yeah, I can take my breaks, but no one else is taking breaks, mom. I go, so we really need to look at, yeah, boys might be boys, but it also might be their behaviors might be really a cry for help to be like, all right, what can I do to help adjust the way I'm acting to make it more functional so that not saying that a child might look differently, which we all know being a child, it's so hard. But I do believe that being a child, everyone looks at what everyone else is doing. And
Hmm.
if a boy is running around and being wild, maybe look at it like, okay, maybe they need to be on the outside of the mat, or maybe they need to go run an errand to the principal. So it's more functional in what you're trying to adjust with that behavior or decrease that behavior versus, oh, a boy will be boy. A boy, boys
Hmm.
will be boys. It's you kind of feel like you're always defending yourself or you're always on guard when you have children. But then when you have boys, you're like, oh yeah, boys will be boys. Like, no, it's different when a
Hmm.
child might be diagnosed with ADHD, especially being a boy, just because of the energy level. But overall, I do feel like as long as you can really look at it as a whole and not look at it as
Hmm.
like, oh, okay.
Well, I like your approach, which is what are the individual needs of
Mm-hmm.
that boy, of that child? What is working? What's not? How do
Yeah.
we better accommodate it? How do we find positive outlets for it? And how do we preserve their confidence
Yeah.
in the meantime?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and That's not a gender thing, that's not an age thing, it's not a
No.
diagnosis thing, that's just a human being to human being thing.
Mhm. And I do think that children, when they're initially diagnosed with ADHD or even adults, it
Mhm,
does turn into something different. So my younger son, who it evolves. So my older son was very, very hyper as a kid, and he's definitely mellowed out being a teenager. But we've
mhm,
noticed other things, so more emotional dysregulation and more. It would be like executive, more of like an executive functioning type thing. We're noticing like he's really having a difficult time with time management and really initiating the plan. But my younger one also has anxiety in addition to ADHD. So we see more of those type of tendencies. So it's definitely, it evolves. So, a
mhm,
child might change, but even though they might be maturing, it just might be they figured out the coping strategies they needed for that initial characteristic. And now they need to address other characteristics that might be coming up because of different situations or different events in their life that have occurred.
and that goes back to that stay humble part, because just when you think you've got it, life changes on you,
Yeah.
they're maturing, their bodies are changing, their social world is changing, education is changing, and for those of you who have not yet listened to Luke Gilligan's episode, actually, he's gonna be coming back on because he has ADHD. He also has bipolar 2, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly, which he's going to be chatting about that on the podcast as well. Incredible young man. He's in college and he's not just surviving, he is thriving in college, but he really speaks to what it's like to be the young man and to be in that system. And he does embrace everything about himself, but definitely I appreciate that he, as parents, us talking about it from a parent perspective is great, but to hear from it from the child perspective, at this point he's a young man, but to hear about it from his perspective is so very helpful, especially, for you
Yeah.
that have kiddos that are more Jill's age. It's helpful to kind of see the preview and where this is going. But he really opened my eyes to that difference between child ADHD and then the adult version of
Yeah.
that. And totally helpful conversation. But last thing I want to chat with you about, Jill, is something that you actually dedicate an entire chapter of your book to, which is food dyes, particularly red food dye.
Yes.
And I know I have quite a few friends who have found that removing dyes from their children's diet has helped with behavior, particularly hyperactivity. I know there's tremendous amounts of research on that. Can you talk us through how you as a family decided that that was not helpful to have in your diet, and some of the benefits of removing it?
Sure. So red dye, what we figured out when they were younger, unfortunately, it's in everything. It's
I
in
know. Yeah.
vanilla frosting. It's in,
What?
yep, vanilla cake mix, yellow cake mix. Yeah, it's difficult. We only stick to Betty Crocker. We love Betty Crocker. They have everything they have very limited red dyes. A lot of even frostings have the yellow dyes, but they're okay with the yellow dyes. But even marshmallows have red dye in them.
What?
Yeah,
This is crazy.
I
And what
know.
is it about the red dye in particular? Because they can handle blue and yellow fine?
We have never figured out. We just knew it was linked to some sort of the red dye, whether it was natural or artificial. But
Mm.
what we figured out with them is my older one became very dysregulated. He became very emotional. He just couldn't handle it. So we took Skittles out. Our kids love chocolate. They're chocolate fiends now because it's just so easy and simple. But it was just so difficult when they would go to parties because so many people,
Oh, yeah.
it's always had the dyes in the cakes or the chips. So Doritos, Cool Ranch
What?
Doritos. Yep, Cool Ranch
Man,
Doritos.
this is
So
in places that
yeah, I
you
know.
just don't think about, and it's one thing to
Yep,
be an adult and read labels. I have
right.
some issues with food, I gotta read the label on everything,
Yep,
but to be a kid and ask the parent of the house you're visiting, "Can I please read the back of the Doritos bag?" I
I
mean, that
know. And
that has to be hard.
it is. It's funny. Both of them do have a difficult time reading, or they've struggled in the past. So the one thing they've become very familiar with, and they learn early on, is to read labels because they would look for. And there's so many different red dyes. There's red
Mhm.
lake dyes, and there's just red dyes, and it's just it. It definitely was a learning lesson for all of us. But we created a food diary for them. That's how we figured it out. We did a big log, and I just ended up omitting it from their diets, and we noticed a huge increase in the ability to handle different situations. And our younger one would get more hyper. So we definitely decreased that because he has much more energy than probably an average child. But then when you add the red dye, it was as if he looked like a pinball machine ball that would just go back and forth. He's like, I can't control myself. And we would just put him to bed, or they would take a nap. So it was a learning lesson for everyone. It was hard, the grandparents, because you just want to give. So they had to read the labels. It was definitely a learning curve for all of us. But in the long run, dyes, like we were talking, anyone talks about, really shouldn't be in foods. So
Yep, shouldn't be in foods, but that's a story for another
it
day. But
is.
if anybody who's in charge of regulating that in the United States is listening, we're voting for no
We
dyes.
are. Yes, we are.
Yeah, I see it too. And I'm living proof that food means a lot in terms of the outcome of your life. So what goes in comes out,
Yep.
and if not so great stuff goes in, then a lot of those not so great behaviors or feelings come out. And I try to be mindful of my kiddos' diet, but I also get you don't want to be the mean mom all the
Correct.
time. When they go trick or treating, and you say, I gotta go through the candies first before you eat something. And it's like, Mom.
I
So
know.
we've tried doing things like trading them out in the past, and they're pretty good about that, but they're still younger. I'm sure as they get older, this is going to get harder. But I'll have a stash of candies that I know I feel good about
Mhm.
at home. And then when they go to school or a party or trick or treating and they get something that they know is probably not something
Yep.
that's great for them, they'll bring it back and we swap out. So I'm not asking them to totally miss out. It's not the same.
Yep.
They're not always participating in the moment, and I get that. But that's worked pretty well for us. But hey, if any of you out there have good ideas, we're all ears. So please
Yes.
share that with us. You can let us know on our social media pages, send us an email, get a hold of us on the website. But I want to send us off, Jill. But first, can you let everyone know where they can get a hold of your book and also just learning more about your family?
Yes. So our book you can find on Amazon. It's called Itchy Brain. It's a family's perspective and positive outlook on ADHD. That's the full title. You can find on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or any other online bookstores or distributors. We do have a website. It's www.itchybrainadhd.com. And we do have an Instagram that you can find, and it's itchy_brain_ADHD.
I love it. And I was checking out some of your most recent posts, and it's such a great thing to follow. Whether you have ADHD or a family
Yep.
member does, it's just great to follow because you also just talk about advocacy and parenting
Mm-hmm.
and laughing at ourselves sometimes and embracing being a misfit. So
Yep.
be sure to follow them there. But Jill, you have so generously offered to give away a free book, a free copy of Itchy Brain to one of our listeners. So if that sounds interesting to you, here's all you've got to do. Just comment on our social media postings about this episode. Uh, every Tuesday, we put announcements out on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram about Mothers of Misfits in the latest episode. So when Jill's episode comes out, just comment when you see that. Just tell us something you like about this episode, something you learned, maybe some cake recipes that don't include red dyes,
Yep.
or how you've convinced your kids not to eat Skittles. We want to hear from you, but just throw something in the comments, and that'll automatically put you in the running for getting a free book. And then we'll make sure to let you know if you're the winner. Jill, thank you so, so much for spending your at this point afternoon with me, but everybody listening will probably catch this a different time. But we're just really glad that you shared your wisdom with us, your mom perspective, your professional perspective, and I know we've all gained some really great tips, tricks, and strategies today. So thanks
No,
again.
thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Mothers of Misfits podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We also invite you to visit us at mothersofmisfits.com.